Hello. So today we are taking a look at the Carenado Cessna Skylane, or Cessna 182 Skylane in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So this pretty much completes the set of Carenado aircraft as far as I'm concerned. I've been acquiring them slowly over the last week or so and doing test flights in each one to take a look at them. They are not study level, but I think for beginners they are actually really nice aircraft. They're really nicely modelled and they're kind of good enough for most people. Obviously, if you're doing real-world training or you're a bit of a purist, then they're going to, come up short for you. But if you just want to go for a fly and you want something that looks the part and behaves, broadly as it should, then you can't go far wrong, really, and they're very good value for money. So you can see that the modelling is, as you expect from Carenado, it almost looks photographic. So you're probably wondering, this looks very similar to a Cessna 172, and what's the big difference? Well, I've looked this up. The Skylane, or the Cessna 182, is a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier, and a little bit faster than a 172. But otherwise, it's broadly the same aircraft. In terms of cost of ownership of the real thing, that's where it really comes in. Because it's faster, you get to places quicker. Therefore, the engine isn't being run for as long. Therefore, the service hours aren't as bad on the 182 versus the 172. So although it's more expensive to buy, it's actually cheaper to run. If we go and have a look inside, it's got the glass cockpit. So we've got G1000s. You will notice, though, it doesn't have the autopilot controls on the bezel of the G1000s. It has a separate autopilot on the fascia. Also, you will notice you have control of the propeller, which you don't always with these smaller Cessnas. So this particular one that's modelled has got the propeller condition. We can remove the yoke to see the switches. In common with most Carenados, the breakers don't work, so you can't do simulations of pulling plugs out while you're in flight. There is a small tablet. We can have a quick look at that. So it gives you some static elements. So we're going to switch those on to have a look at that. So if we go and switch those on, have a look outside, we get some cones and a trolley a tow hitch, and external power, which is all very nice. The doors obviously work as well. So if we go and turn those back off for a moment and look around, so doors work both sides. The windows work as well, so you can play games with opening and closing the windows. You will notice in the 182 the top of the window is lower in comparison, or your seating position is higher, should I say, perhaps closer to the ceiling than maybe the 172, but certainly this is lower, which restricts your view sideways. So you may want to play games with mapping keyboard keys if you don't have head tracking. Mapping keyboard keys to move your pilot's head position up and down, which I have already done. So I have got the opportunity to crouch and look out, which helps with obviously landing approaches, things like that. Okay, so let's go and put the tablet back away. Shall we take it for a fly and see how it behaves? So first things first, we're going to go and turn on the master battery switch, and it makes this reassuring beep noise. So the G1000 will obviously boot up. The reason you get the primary flight display immediately is because the engine gauges are on the primary flight display. So we're going to go and turn on the beacon light to warn anybody on the ground. We'll turn on the nav light as well. I apologise if I start coughing in the middle of this, by the way. I'm actually not very well at the moment, so I'm kind of doing my best. The fuel shutoff is already turned to both engines. It's not off by default in this aircraft, in its cold and dark state. We need to push the mixture in, which I will do with my controller. We need to push the propeller to 100% on its condition. We're going to crack the throttle open and then turn the magnetos to both and then beyond both to start, and the engine starts. It's quite quiet from inside. If we go outside, it's a different story. I'm just going to keep an eye on this to see that it doesn't start completely overpowering me talking, so I'll maybe turn it down a little bit. So if we run it up, you'll hear the engine. The sound's awesome. Notice the aircraft being pushed around by the forces from the propeller as we accelerated it, and the nose compressing on the suspension. It's very cool. Okay, let's go and get the plane finished with getting it ready then. So we'll turn the alternator on now, we'll turn the avionics buses on, we'll go and turn the strobe on ready for takeoff, and the landing lights, we'll leave them on while we're flying around. Just waiting for the system to boot up, so typical G1000 really. Okay, let's put the yoke back on, now everything's ready, and you can see as well everything's animated as you would think it should be. We can turn the parking brake off, which is this lever here, which obviously raises the pedals so they can be used as foot brakes, or wheel brakes I should say. So we'll crack the throttle open, move the flaps to takeoff position, roll out onto the runway. We're at Boonville, where I've done quite a few flights recently. It's a nice little airport, a picturesque little valley. So there's a small amount of torque to the left of the engine, not too much, so we just hold that off with the rudder. Fairly straightforward. Watching the speed increase, so 40 knots, 50 knots, 60 knots, and we can rotate, and we are in the air. So we'll just have a quick look at that from outside. You can see I've held a consistent amount of pressure on the rudder to hold it straight, which it's doing. We'll raise the flaps, obviously as affected lift, so I'm counteracting with a little bit more backstick pressure just for the moment until we gather some more speed. But it's remarkably stable. So we can come back off the throttle a little bit now. I didn't calibrate the altimeter when we took off, that was a bit naughty. So we're just going to get level, and then we'll turn the autopilot on and have a little play with it. Okay, so wings are level. Oh, sim has paused. Let's just wait for it to unpause itself. I haven't seen it pause for the last day. It's a bit random when it chooses to do this. There we go, it's unlocked itself. It's obviously something to do with the servers. Okay, so if we go and engage the autopilot, it will immediately go for roll and pitch mode. There is a little bit of randomness in whether it goes into roll mode or not, so I'm not sure if it's a bug with the sim itself or the aircraft. But usually if you go and cycle the CDI, you can get it to change whether that does that or not. So it's holding roll and pitch. If we can test that by disengaging autopilot. If we go and tip it over and then go for autopilot, it's going to, within a certain number of degrees of level, it will always roll it back to level. If you're at a particular, beyond that bank angle, I think it's about 5 degrees or so. Beyond that, it will hold the roll angle that you engaged at. Everything works on the autopilot as you'd imagine. The one little quirk that I have seen is, say you were going to climb for a particular height, so say we go for 4,500 feet here. What you have to do is arm it here, and then that gives you the vertical speed option for the buttons to control vertical speed. So I know the implementation of these is done differently every time you see a Cap 140. So this one has that little bit of a quirk that you can't just press the Alt key, the altitude key, to toggle putting the vertical speed in. You have to go and arm your altitude, and that gives you the opportunity for vertical speed. So, not having played with a real Cap 140, I can't say which is the correct way it should work. But it just gives you some idea. Okay, so GPS and VOR navigation will just work, as you'd expect they should. So I'm not going to get into that in this flight today. So let's go and disengage that autopilot and turn back down the valley. and we'll do a basic stall test. Now I'm going to say I have flown this once previously, and I did a stall test and I crashed the aircraft, so you need to be careful. I was deliberately trying to tumble it, but it started to overspeed. If you overspeed this aircraft, you will lose control authority. Yeah? So just something to bear in mind. So I'm going to just do a level stall. I've cut the engine to idle. We're going to hold the nose just above the horizon line and let the speed bleed off. So I'm going to be quite careful about how we do these tests today. Let's pull the nose up to 5 degrees nose up just to lose this speed quickly and easily. So you'll note, here we go, here comes the stall. Starting to fishtail. I'm trying to hold it level. Let's pull it harder into it. And the right wing has gone. Now we need to be mindful not to let this overspeed. And we have done so. If it starts to overspeed, you will lose control responsiveness and you will go into the ground. So you can see it stalls quite viciously. I guess it's because it's a bigger, heavier aeroplane. It's not like, you know, the tiny throw-around aeroplanes that we've often tried to tumble. Because it's got that heavier engine in the front, I'm guessing it's a bit more disastrous if you stall it. So you saw there, it tumbled, it fell. There's not much you can do other than, you know, get the plane stable, get the nose down, and pull out of the dive before it accelerates too fast. Okay, so we're going to try and approach into Boonville. So we're just coming back round, losing some height on the way. So probably as a factor of it being so heavy, it doesn't lose speed in a hurry when you're off the throttle. Obviously you can impact that by the propeller condition. So you can see the speed is just falling off. So we're going to drop the flaps. Gone 50% on the flaps so far. Now remember we said about this issue with being able to see out the side. So I'm going to duck down. And we get to at least see the runway by crouching down. I guess in the real world you'd be crouched down over here, wouldn't you? Anyway, let's go and turn ourselves around. We can sit up. It's you get quite a nice view looking out over the nose. So full flaps. I've not tried side slipping this yet, so that's going to be another thing to have some fun with. And we're going to do it now because we're too high. So I'm going to side slip to the right. It's quite a long runway. Obviously, because it's got a tricycle undercarriage, we can just flare it along the centre line and it'll be quite straightforward. Remember about stalling though. There we go, nice and smooth. So we'll go around again. So flaps back to takeoff position. And rotate. There's no wind today, so we can use the runway in either direction. Climb out. the reciprocal. Basically just going to the other end of the valley. And we'll come back in again, and we'll come in a bit slower and a bit lower this time and try to do it in a bit more planned manner rather than forcing it down onto the runway in such a accelerated kind of descent and scrambled manner. So at cruising altitude, kind of 4,000 or 5,000 feet, this will easily do 135 knots, so it's quite significantly faster than a Cessna 172. I've not looked up the numbers to see what its maximum cruising altitude might be. What we can actually do is just scoot sideways to see around the corner of the cockpit. Yeah, we've gone too far the other way now. This is where it really pays to have head tracking, which I don't have obviously. So we're keeping an eye on the indicated airspeed. We don't want to get too slow because we saw its stall characteristics are not great. There we go, a bit more pedestrian this time. Okay, did you notice on both approaches it tends to fishtail when it starts to hang on the wings? It's very pronounced in this, much more so than the normal Cessna. So we'll raise the flaps, bring it back in, and see how well it taxis. How controllable, I should say, it is in the taxi. So yeah, it's absolutely straightforward, as you would expect with a tricycle undercarriage aircraft. You can follow the marker lines very, very easily. And the turning circle is incredibly tight. So, parking brake on. We pull the mixture, that should cut the fuel to the engine. And there we go. So lights can all come back off. If I can click on them. Is it going to let me click on that? Yeah. They're a little bit fiddly. So avionics can come off. The alternator can come off. We can... Interestingly, you can't set this to off. Okay, oh yes you can. It's just a bit fiddly on the click spots for it. And then turn the main batteries off. Open the door, and we can go for a walk. So, there we go. There is the Cessna 182 Skylane in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Bit bigger, bit heavier, bit faster than the Cessna 172. It's not study level, but it's still great fun and it looks really nice. So I think it's a great option in the Carenado fleet, to be honest. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully you enjoyed that, and I'll see you again soon. And I made it without coughing too much. Hurrah!